Picture this. A single Jeep. Unmarked. No studio plates, no Batjack Productions insignia. No sign of the man who had spent the last 2 decades becoming the most recognizable face in American cinema. Just a battered military surplus Willys with a cracked windshield and a half-tank of gasoline. Parked at the edge of a dirt road somewhere southeast of Flagstaff, Arizona, engine ticking as it cooled in the October air. Inside, one man. 6 feet 4 inches of him folded into a space built for someone considerably smaller. His hands that had gripped more prop rifles, more saddle horns, more leading ladies than almost any actor alive, rested flat and open on his knees. Not gripping anything. Not reaching for anything. Just resting. No camera crew. No publicist. No studio liaison. No one. The man sitting in that Jeep was John Wayne, and he had been missing for 19 days. Back in Los Angeles, people were starting to ask questions. Not publicly, not yet. The machinery of Hollywood silence moves efficiently when the right people apply the right pressure. And the right people had been applying it since the 4th day after Wayne failed to appear for a pre-production meeting at Republic Pictures. By day 7, his personal assistant had been told, firmly and without elaboration, that Mr. Wayne was handling personal matters and would return when those matters were resolved. By day 14, the story being told to the trades was that he was resting at a private property following an exhausting international production schedule. None of it was true. Not exactly. The truth was sitting in that Jeep, staring through a cracked windshield at a landscape that had no interest whatsoever in who John Wayne was. And that's where this story begins. Not with the disappearance, but with why a man who had spent 30 years building an identity as immovable as the Monument Valley Mesas he'd filmed against suddenly needed to vanish from the world that had created him. This is that story. To understand what happened in October of 1962, you have to understand what the previous 18 months had done to John Wayne. Not to the icon. Not to the Duke. To Marion Robert Morrison, the son of a Winterset, Iowa pharmacist who had arrived in Hollywood in 1926 with a borrowed football scholarship. A summer job moving furniture on the Fox lot, and no particular plan beyond not going back to Iowa. By the autumn of 1962, Wayne was 55 years old. He had made 137 films. He had survived the blacklist years not by hiding from politics, but by charging into them at full volume, which had cost him exactly the kind of audience he couldn't afford to lose and gained him exactly the audience that had turned the Alamo into the defining political statement of his career. He had produced, directed, and personally financed a film that had almost bankrupted him. He had watched the Alamo receive 7 Academy Award nominations and win precisely 1 Best Sound. He had listened to people he respected tell him that the film was a vanity project and that he'd been right for the wrong reasons. He had absorbed every word of it. That was 1961. In January of 1962, Wayne had been in France for the production of The Longest Day, Darrell F. Zanuck's impossibly ambitious D-Day epic, a film so large it required 3 directors, an international cast of 42 speaking roles, and 42 shooting days across 5 countries. Wayne played Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Vandervoort, a real officer who had commanded the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment on June 6, 1944, with a broken ankle that he had refused to acknowledge for the duration of the assault. Wayne had a fractured ankle of his own, sustained 3 weeks before shooting began, and had similarly refused to acknowledge it. He'd asked nobody to move his marks. He'd asked for no accommodations. He'd delivered what the production needed and asked for nothing in return. The film had wrapped in the spring. It wouldn't release until October 4th, 1962, the same week Wayne disappeared. Understand the coincidence of that timing, because it is not incidental. The Longest Day opened on October 4th, 1962, at the Criterion Theater on Broadway, New York City, to an advance ticket sale of $1. For million and a critical reception that was, by the standards of the era, something close to rapturous. It would go on to gross over $17 million domestically, more than 5 times its production cost. It would be nominated for 5 Academy Awards and win 2. It was, by every measurable standard, exactly the kind of film that should have made John Wayne feel vindicated. He was in it. His performance as Vandervoort had been received respectfully. The film said everything he believed about the Second World War and the men who had fought it. He left Los Angeles on October 7th, 3 days after the premiere, and told no one where he was going. His business manager, Beau Roos, received a 4-line note delivered by courier. It said that Wayne was taking time away, that he should be contacted only in a genuine emergency, and that the definition of genuine emergency did not include production scheduling, press obligations, or anything related to an upcoming Paramount development deal that had been in negotiation for 6 weeks. He drove north and then east, across the Mojave and into Arizona, the same landscape he had been filming in for 30 years, the same red rock and flat sky that had become so associated with his image that people sometimes forgot he was a man who had to look at it, not just be photographed in front of it. He had a bedroll, a case of canned food, a transistor radio that mostly received static, 2 paperback books, a biography of Sam Houston, and a battered copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations that his son Michael had given him 3 Christmases earlier, and that he had never opened until that drive east out of Barstow. He did not have a clear destination. That was not an accident. Here's where it changes. The people who knew John Wayne best, and the list was shorter than his public image suggested, would tell you the same thing if you asked them in the right moment, at the right hour of the evening, with enough distance from the professional machinery that shaped everything they said publicly. They would tell you that Wayne carried the weight of his own image the way other men carry a physical injury. Something acquired young, managed daily, never fully healed. Something that had calcified into a kind of structural support. Take it away and the man might not stand straight, but live with it long enough and it ground you down in ways you couldn't fully articulate. Director John Ford, the man who had more to do with creating the on-screen John Wayne than anyone alive, including Wayne himself, had told him something in 1951 during the production of The Quiet Man that Wayne had not been able to stop thinking about. Ford had said it the way Ford said everything important. Not as wisdom, not as instruction, but as a casual observation delivered with his back half-turned, as if it were nothing. He'd said, "The problem with you, Marion, is that you believe the audience." Wayne had not answered. He never answered Ford immediately. He thought about things for days, sometimes for years, and then he acted. He was still acting on that observation 11 years later, alone in the Arizona desert, with a cracked windshield and a copy of Marcus Aurelius, and nothing scheduled for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember. His hands were the thing that people who met him in person always mentioned. Not his height, though at 6 feet 4 inches he had remained imposing in a way that younger actors who cleared 6 feet somehow didn't. Not his voice, which was its own subject. His hands. They were disproportionately large even for his frame, the knuckles thick from the physical work of 3 decades of production. Not prop work, actual physical work. Wayne had never been the actor who stood at his mark and waited. He loaded his own horses. He carried his own weight in crowd scenes. On Sands of Iwo Jima, he had done every piece of the physical action himself because he believed an audience could tell the difference, and because he was embarrassed by the alternative. Sitting in that Jeep on the 7th day of his disappearance, somewhere on a dirt track off Route 89 with Monument Valley 40 miles south, and the painted desert spread out to the east like something a painter had invented, he opened Marcus Aurelius for the second time and read a passage he had already read twice the previous night. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He read it 3 times. He set the book down on the passenger seat. He got out of the Jeep and stood in the morning cold. It was October in Arizona, and the desert at altitude runs cold before 8 in the morning, and he looked east for approximately 4 minutes without moving. Nobody saw this. Nobody recorded it. It happened the way most of the things that actually shape a man happen. Quietly, privately, without witnesses, in a place that won't remember it. But here's what the people who knew him best would tell you, years later, about the man who came back from that 3 weeks in the desert. Something had settled. The confrontation didn't happen in the desert. It had been building for months before Wayne left, and it was waiting for him when he returned. To understand it, you need to understand Melville Shavelson. Shavelson was 44 years old in 1962, a writer and director with 19 years in Hollywood, a Writers Guild card, 2 Oscar nominations for screenwriting, and a reputation for intelligent, commercially successful work that occupied the middle ground between prestige cinema and genuine popular entertainment. He was the kind of filmmaker the studios trusted because he delivered, on time, on budget, without the temperamental volatility that made working with certain more celebrated directors feel like contract negotiation with a foreign government. He had been attached to a project called Cast a Giant Shadow, a film about Colonel David Marcus, the American military officer who had helped shape the Israeli army during the 1948 War of Independence. It was a serious story, a true story, and Shavelson had spent 2 years developing it. He needed a name. He needed someone whose presence in a 2-minute role could open the financing conversation the way a completed script alone could not. He wanted John Wayne for a supporting cameo. General Mike Randolph. 15 minutes of screen time maximum. 2 days on set. The meeting had been arranged for October 29th, 1962, 3 weeks after Wayne had disappeared and 12 days after his return, which had been as quiet and uncommented upon as his departure. He'd driven back into Los Angeles on the 17th, parked his Jeep, showered, called Beau Roos, and picked up the stack of messages that had accumulated on his desk as if he'd been gone for a long weekend. Shavelson arrived at Wayne's offices on the Batjack lot at 10 in the morning with his associate producer, with a 40-page treatment, and with a carefully prepared argument for why Wayne was the only choice for the role. What Shavelson had not prepared for was the conversation that met him at the door. Before the meeting formally began, before the treatment was opened, before the casting argument was made, one of Wayne's development associates, a man named Carter who had been with Batjack for 3 years, intercepted Shavelson in the outer office and told him, quietly, that Mr. Wayne had reviewed the preliminary materials and had some reservations about the project's political framing. That the story of Colonel Marcus raised questions about dual loyalties that Mr. Wayne believed needed careful handling. That he was not certain the project as outlined was something he could stand behind publicly. Shavelson was, by the accounts of people present, entirely still for approximately 5 seconds when he heard this. Then he said, clearly enough to be heard by 2 assistants and a secretary, "Tell Mr. Wayne that the men who died in 1948 didn't have the luxury of reservations." The room went silent. Nobody on that lot moved. Carter came back to Shavelson 3 minutes later and said, without expression, "Mr. Wayne will see you now." What happened in that room over the next 47 minutes was witnessed by exactly 4 people. John Wayne, Melville Shavelson, Carter the development associate, and a woman named Patricia who was taking notes and who would later describe the meeting as the strangest business conversation she had been present for in 11 years of Hollywood production work. Wayne was standing when Shavelson entered. Not seated behind his desk the way executives position themselves to communicate authority. Standing to the left of the desk, beside the window, in the gray morning light coming off the lot. In his working clothes. Not a suit. Jeans, a flannel shirt, boots. He was holding a coffee cup in his left hand and not doing anything with his right. In the first second, Shavelson extended his hand. Wayne looked at it for 1 full beat. Not dismissively, not as a power gesture, but with the particular quality of attention that Patricia would later describe as making her feel that she was watching someone read a very complex text very quickly, and then shook it. In the second, Wayne said nothing. It was Shavelson who spoke first. He said, "I owe you an apology for what I said in the outer office." Wayne said, "No, you don't." That was the first exchange. For words from Wayne. 3 seconds, beginning to end. What happened next took the better part of 40 minutes. And it was not a confrontation in any of the ways that word implies when you apply it to John Wayne. There was no raised voice. There was no physical dimension. There was no moment where the outcome turned on anything as legible as one man backing down. What there was something considerably rarer in the rooms where Hollywood decisions were made. There was an honest conversation. Wayne had read the treatment. Not a summary, the treatment itself, all 40 pages. He had read it twice, once before he left for the desert, and once after he came back, and his reservations were not the ones his associate Carter had communicated. They were more specific, and they were more personal, and he articulated them directly. He said, "The problem I have with this picture isn't politics. I don't have a problem with the politics. The men who fought in that war were doing what they believed was right, and I've got no quarrel with that. The problem I have is that I don't know this story well enough to do it justice, and I am not going to put my name on something I don't know well enough." Shavelson said, "That's why we're here. To tell you the story." And here is where the 47 minutes turned into something neither man had expected when the day began. Wayne said, "Then tell me. Not the pitch. Not the treatment. The story." He sat down. He set down his coffee. He put his right hand flat on the desk, the hand that was too big for any space it occupied. And he looked at Melville Shavelson with the complete, undivided, slightly unsettling attention that was the one thing every person who ever worked with John Wayne mentioned when they spoke about what it was actually like to be in a room with him. And Shavelson told him. He talked for 22 minutes without stopping. About Mickey Marcus, about West Point, about the War of Independence, about what it meant to be the first general in the Israeli army since Judah Maccabee, about the specific detail that had made Shavelson spend 2 years on this material. That Marcus had been killed by friendly fire in the early morning of June 11, 1948, 6 hours before a ceasefire went into effect that he had spent the last weeks of his life negotiating. 6 hours. When Shavelson finished, the room was quiet. Patricia, the note-taker, wrote in her notes, which still exist in a private collection, a single word at the 22-minute mark. Still. Wayne was still for 4 seconds. 5. 6. Then he said, 6 hours. It wasn't a question. Shavelson said, 6 hours. Wayne picked up the treatment from the desk. He held it the way you hold something you're deciding whether to keep. He set it back down. The physical consequence of those 47 minutes was not dramatic. There was no handshake across a desk, no decisive moment where the room could record a turning point. What happened was quieter than that, and in its quietness, it was more permanent. Wayne said, I have 2 conditions. Shavelson said, name them. He said, I want 2 weeks with the research material. Real material. Not the studio summary, the real history. And I want it understood that if I find something in that material that changes what I believe about how this story should be told, we have a conversation. A real one. Not through associates. Shavelson looked at him for 3 seconds. Then he said, I've been in Hollywood for 19 years. That is the first time a star has asked me for primary sources. Wayne said, then you've been working with the wrong stars. Nobody in that room laughed. Not from tension, from the particular quality of a sentence that lands exactly where it was aimed and requires nothing added to it. The private conversation happened 2 weeks later, after Wayne had spent 12 days with the research materials Shavelson's office sent over. Not the studio package, the real history. Letters from Marcus's wife Emma. After-action reports from the 1948 campaign. A transcript of Marcus's West Point graduation address that Shavelson had obtained from the Academy's archive. Wayne had read all of it. They met again on a Thursday afternoon, November 15, 1962, at a diner on Ventura Boulevard that Wayne used for meetings he didn't want recorded as studio events. No associates. No note-takers. Just the 2 of them in a corner booth with coffee. Wayne said very directly, I owe you an explanation for what happened before I left. Shavelson said he didn't need one. Wayne said, I know you don't. I'm giving you one anyway. He paused. He was looking at the table when he said it. Not at Shavelson. I spent 20 days in Arizona thinking about what I actually believe versus what I've been saying I believe. Those aren't always the same thing. I'd been confusing the 2 for a while. Shavelson, who was not a man given to silence, said nothing. Wayne said, the thing about Marcus is that he didn't perform conviction. He acted on it. There's a difference. I've been performing conviction for so long I forgot there was a difference. It was Shavelson who said later, to the small number of people he told this story to over the following decade, that those 2 sentences were the most honest thing he had ever heard a major Hollywood star say about his own career. That the specific nature of the self-awareness, not self-pity, not complaint, just a clean-eyed assessment of a distance between stated belief and actual action, was something he had never encountered in a meeting room and rarely encountered anywhere else. He said yes to Wayne's involvement and cast a giant shadow. Wayne was on set for 2 days in 1965 during production in Israel and Rome. He played General Mike Randolph in approximately 12 minutes of screen time. He had read every piece of research material Shavelson sent him. He knew the history cold. When principal photography wrapped on Wayne's scenes, Shavelson walked him to the car that would take him back to the airport. They shook hands at the door. Wayne said, "Thank you for telling me the story." Shavelson said, "Thank you for asking to hear it." Wayne got into the car. Shavelson stood on the street for a while after the car left, in whatever city they were in. Some accounts say Rome, some say a location outside Tel Aviv, and thought about the conversation on Ventura Boulevard 3 years earlier, about the specific sentence that had stayed with him the way certain sentences do, for reasons that have nothing to do with elegance and everything to do with accuracy. Not performance. Action. The difference between them. That's not a Hollywood distinction. That's a human one. Melville Shavelson directed 11 more films after Cast a Giant Shadow. He wrote 3 books. He served 2 terms as president of the Writers Guild of America. He taught screenwriting at UCLA for 7 years in the 1970s and 1980s, and by the accounts of every student who studied under him, he returned repeatedly to the same distinction in his lectures. Not the mechanics of story, not the technical architecture of the 3-act structure, or the precise calibration of the midpoint turn. Something more fundamental. He would ask his students, what is the difference between performing a belief and acting on it? Most of them would stare at him. Some would attempt answers that were, in his assessment, close but not quite. He would listen to all of them. He would nod at the useful portions. And then he would say, with the particular economy of a man who has carried a sentence for a long time and learned exactly how much weight it can bear. Performed conviction needs an audience. Real conviction doesn't. He never told them where the line came from. It was not his line to attribute. But he used it every semester for as long as he taught, and the students who carried it forward into their own work, into television, into independent film, into documentary, into theater, have carried it as their own, the way all the best lessons eventually become. Absorbed completely, origin forgotten, content permanent. John Wayne returned from the Arizona desert in October of 1962 with nothing anyone could see. No artifact, no document, no epiphany that resolved cleanly into a press release. He came back looking, by all accounts, about the same as he'd left. Maybe slightly thinner. Maybe slightly quieter in the first weeks back. His assistant noted that he seemed less interested in the stack of pending decisions and more interested in which decisions actually required his attention, and that the 2 categories turned out to be considerably different in size. He made 32 more films before his death in 1979. He never publicly spoke about the 3 weeks he spent in the desert. When journalists asked about the longest day period, about the gap in his schedule in the fall of 1962, he would deflect with the particular ease of a man who has decided that some experiences belong to him and not to the record. He would say he'd been resting. He would change the subject. He would ask about the journalist's work. He was, by every account of the people who knew him in the last 17 years of his life, different in some quality that was difficult to specify and impossible to ignore. His director friend Andrew McLaglen, who worked with Wayne on 6 films after 1962, told an interviewer in 1984 that the post-1962 Wayne had a different quality in the room. Not calmer, exactly. Not wiser, exactly. More present. As if some portion of his attention that had previously been directed toward maintaining the architecture of his public identity had been quietly, permanently redirected inward. McLaglen said, he stopped needing to be John Wayne in the room. He still was, but he'd stopped needing to be. Now return to that dirt road southeast of Flagstaff. The Jeep with the cracked windshield. The hands open on the knees. The morning cold coming off the desert at altitude. He wasn't hiding there. He wasn't running there. He was doing something that the machinery of his public life had made almost architecturally impossible for 2 decades. He was thinking. One man. One empty road. One question that the landscape didn't need him to answer. Not performance. Action. The difference between them. And if you want to understand why a man capable of that kind of honesty also walked into production meetings and said nothing about the things that mattered most, if you want to understand the specific shape of the silence he kept for the last 17 years of his life, there's another story. One that begins not in the desert, but on a studio lot in 1965, in a conversation that 2 people agreed would never be repeated. And the reason John Wayne kept that agreement, even at significant personal cost, that's a story for another time.